Welcome to the Low Law Podcast, Justice in West Texas.
Welcome to the Low Law Podcast, Justice in West Texas, with attorney Tara Gilmore-Low, founder of the Low Law firm in Abilene. Tara has spent more than 20 years helping West Texans through some of the toughest injuries a family can face. I'm Chelsea, and today we're talking about traumatic brain injuries and spinal injuries. Tara will explain what they actually look like, why they're often misunderstood, and how these cases unfold here in West Texas. Welcome, Tara.
Hi, Chelsea. Thank you.
To start, could you explain some of the common misunderstandings you hear about brain and spinal injuries?
Yeah. And with brain injuries, there are a couple of biggies. One of the biggest misconceptions with a brain injury is that you have to have hit your head on something. Another one is that the scans that you get at the hospital or the doctor's office will show damage. And, I've handled these cases for years, and some of those are the biggest misconceptions, when the reality is the jostling of your brain in an accident can be enough to cause a traumatic brain injury. And the same thing goes. The damage is not always going to be evident on a regular MRI or a CT scan. So those are some of the biggest misconceptions with brain injuries. And to be honest, there's a number more. Now, when it comes to spinal injuries and back injuries, there are also a lot of misconceptions, but they're interesting. A lot of people think that back injuries are immediately evident when you're involved in a car accident or some other type of accident like that, like a premises case or something like that. And that's not always true. A lot of times the pain and injury doesn't present itself for a little while. So there are some misconceptions around these injuries for sure. And those are some of the biggies that I've seen.
What are some of the early signs or symptoms that should make somebody take a closer look at whether, hey, I might actually have a brain or spine injury?
When you're talking about a brain injury, the things that I always look for with my clients is headaches, dizziness, vertigo. And that you would think someone's automatically going to know if they have vertigo. That's not exactly the case. Some people will just think they're momentarily dizzy and they're not sure what's going on. But vertigo is another big sign of a traumatic brain injury. Personality changes. That's another thing that you might see with a brain injury. And so, but my main thing, especially right after you've suffered an accident, is if you've got a headache, if you're dizzy, if you're having trouble sleeping, if you have ears ringing, things like that, you got to go get those things checked out. When it comes to your spinal or your back injuries, absent a very traumatic spinal injury where you're talking the spinal cord is snapped, absent that, when we're talking about like disc issues and things like that, what you want to be wary of is kind of a dull, aching pain that doesn't resolve quickly. You want to go and get that checked out. At least let the doctor look at it. Let them take a look, feel around, see what they can see, and just start creating that record. Another symptom that you might see early on with a spinal injury is some numbness, tingling in your lower extremities. Could be your upper extremities. Just depends on where it's at. But that's something else to look for as well.
Why is it so important that someone goes and gets checked out by a doctor, even when the symptoms seem mild or delayed?
That's a very good question. And here's why. When it comes to treating brain and spinal injuries, and when I say treating, what I really mean is diagnosing, having that record of consistent complaints of symptomology helps the doctors and the specialists so much down the road, especially with a brain injury. If you go in, we're in West Texas, and so a lot of us, we don't like to go to the doctor. We want to pretend these symptoms are going to resolve themselves and go away. And I get that. I'm like that, but it's a really bad decision. And the reason it's a bad decision is when you've got that dizziness, those episodes of dizziness, but you're able to stand there and get them to go away. you're not creating a record for the doctor to use to get you treatment if the problem gets worse. So every time something like that is happening, it's really good to go to the doctor. Even if there's not a lot that can be done, you're creating that record. And it's someone besides you creating it, because what we also see a lot with brain injury patients is this memory problem. A lot of them don't remember their symptoms. Just because they're in front of someone that day, they'll say, oh no, I haven't had any headaches, when they've probably had headaches every day for 6 weeks, but they may not remember it. They may not think to say it. So it's a very good idea to go ahead and start getting that symptomology documented. And the same goes for spinal injuries. That dull aching pain that I mentioned earlier oftentimes will progress, and it will progress to a sharp pain. It might progress from a dull aching pain with no tingling in the extremities to a dull, sharp, aching pain with massive tingling in the extremities. And the more of a record you've got of that pain and it continuing, that makes it a lot easier for your providers to provide you care, and it starts creating that picture for them to properly diagnose you.
What kinds of challenges do people often run into once they're back home and they're just trying to get through daily activities with these types of injuries?
That's a good question also. With a brain injury, there's a number of challenges that I have seen people face. And with spinal injuries too, it's just, there's some differences. Usually with a spinal injury, you know what's going on and you're more aware, and you can adapt. With a brain injury, oftentimes that awareness is not there. So basic everyday things you may not be able to do, or you may not remember to do them. So bathing, putting on your clothes, knowing how to answer your cell phone, feeding yourself. There's a lot of things like that people will face when they go home if they've got a brain injury, that they'll have to learn to adapt to. With spinal injuries, there are some similarities and challenges, like maybe being able to get dressed, maybe being able to shower on their own, things like that. But it's, like I said, it's a little bit different. But what you're mostly going to face is a change to your routine, and you're going to have to adapt to a new normal. And that's difficult for anyone.
My husband had a slipped disc, and I tied his shoes for months while he was waiting for his surgery. He
That's
could not tie
exactly
his own
right.
shoes.
Yes, that is exactly right. I've had a number of clients, their spouses, their parents have had to do some things that we would not want someone else doing for us on a regular basis. So,
Can you describe an example or a situation that shows how easily one of these injuries, brain or spine, can be overlooked at first?
sure. The obvious way with a brain injury, the obvious way that something can get overlooked is unless you've got a hole in your skull and part of your brain seeping out, there may be more severe injuries that they deal with. And so as long as we're talking about like a mild or a moderate TBI where it's not as obvious, those things can go unaddressed for a long time to deal with something more pressing. And the same goes with a spinal injury. You may have a back injury like a disc issue or something like that, but you may also have 2 broken legs. So the broken legs are going to get dealt with long before that back injury is ever dealt with. So oftentimes these can go completely undiagnosed for months.
What should people expect when it comes to the medical side of these cases, like testing, specialists, therapy?
Well, talking about that stuff, I'm talking about it from the perspective of a liability suit. So someone's at fault and has caused these accidents. And so from what I've seen in these cases, it can be really exhausting. You're talking multiple scans, lab tests galore, doctor's appointments, various, especially with a brain injury, you're talking about all types of different wild therapies. I hear about different therapies all the time with these brain injuries, and some of them I'm like, what does a crystal in ears have to do with anything? But it does. The neuros they know how to deal with it. I don't. But there's a bunch of different types of therapies that you can expect, trying to find some resolution or some way to diminish the symptoms. With spinal injuries, it's similar. You're going to see a lot of scans, a lot of physical therapy. not as much wild type stuff as you'll see that they try with a brain injury, but you're going to see a lot of therapy and a lot of scans, probably a lot of medications go with both of them, especially in a spinal injury when they're trying to alleviate the pain. That can be very difficult to manage.
How do these injuries typically affect someone's ability to work or keep up with their usual responsibilities?
It can affect them quite a bit. Brain injuries, you can be dealing with a wide range of symptomologies. So you can be dealing with symptomologies such as a lack of memory, which would make completing your everyday work tasks and everyday home tasks difficult, very challenging. Further, you can be dealing with personality issues, like I mentioned earlier, that will affect your interpersonal relationships at work and at home. In some cases, the injuries are so bad, you have mobility issues. So you may not be able to return to work and do the tasks that you were doing before. And that goes along with the spinal injuries. If you're talking about very severe spinal cord injury, you're probably dealing with some major changes in life. You're not going to be able to go back to work and do the same things right away that you were doing before. Sometimes you can work around the injury with some restrictions and things like that. But oftentimes, depending on the severity of the damage, would decide how much of your normal routine you could return to.
Now, in terms of claims, what makes brain and spinal injury claims more complex for insurance companies than other injury cases in West Texas?
Okay, let's be clear. An insurance company can turn a broken leg into something complex. But as far as these go, these are very easy for the insurance company to say, no, he doesn't have a brain injury, or no, he has a pre-existing back injury, a pre-existing neck injury. We're not going to be responsible for that. Our insurance not going to be responsible for that. That's very easy to do in these cases if these things are not properly documented. The very key to these injuries in these liability cases is documenting them. You need to be complaining to someone besides your lawyer and your wife or your husband about what you're going through. It needs to be with your doctor, and you need to be making that effort to get medical treatment because, yes, these are very easy for insurance companies and defense lawyers to manipulate because they're what we call invisible injuries. As we talked about a little bit earlier, you may not automatically know you have these injuries. The symptomology can present in such a way that it could be explained away or ignored for a long time. I've had clients not show up until 6 months after an accident, and all they've had was some back pain that had progressed and gotten to the point they had to do something about it. And they didn't know now how to deal with it with the insurance company because the insurance company's saying, no, we're not responsible for that. You've never mentioned a back injury. Well, no, they probably didn't, but they had pain the whole time. So very, very good to get it documented immediately.
You mentioned that earlier in the show too. Even if it seems like a small issue, go get the doctor to look at it.
Absolutely.
For someone who's facing a long recovery, what do you recommend they do to help stay organized and protect themselves during this process?
So with a brain injury patient, the main thing, and to be quite honest, this is not me telling them that. I've learned this through handling these cases, but really the best thing that a brain injury patient can do is start establishing their new routine. Routine makes their life so much easier, especially when they're dealing with the memory issues. Maybe they're not, they do have some mobility issues or they've got some limitations in the things that they used to be able to do. If they're not remembering to eat, if they're not remembering to bathe, if they don't remember, some of these break my heart, if they don't remember how to put their pants on, getting those routines started and in place early on is the very best thing that they can do. Notes will help them quite a bit. As I understand it, again, I would love to take credit for these suggestions, but these are things that I have learned from neurologists and therapists and experts over the years that these patients need to be doing for themselves to help them. With spine injury patients, it really depends on the level, the severity of the injury. Routines are good, obviously, especially when you're trying to establish a new normal. Getting those routines down are good for both types of injuries. But with a spinal injury, depending again on the severity of the symptoms, if you're able to continue at least some of your daily routines that you were doing before, maybe with just some adaptations, that's the best thing that you can do is taking those steps to get back to your normal, if possible.
A lot of great tips in this episode. Thank you, Tara.
You bet, Chelsea.
And that wraps up today's episode of the Low Law Podcast, Justice in West Texas. If you or someone you love is dealing with a brain injury or a spinal injury after a wreck, Tara and her team are here to help you understand your options and move forward with confidence. Visit lowlawfirm.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone you think might need it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.